Ryavka sat at her desk, bored beyond any tangible sentence able to be constructed. She knew Terrace was meant to be a demotion after she accidentally sent that one cargo freighter directly into a star, but she expected manual labor, not the most mundane job in the entire Union. For the last 12 rotations, it's been nothing but taking in new arrivals or helping current occupants leave the station. She couldn't even do patrol, as more experienced officers made sure nobody would cause trouble. But this was a research station. Unless an officer was dumb enough to anger one of the scientists, trouble wasn't likely. So, for the last 12 rotations, she had been practically living in the entrance and departure booth to the docking levels. Right now, she was playing with a small cube made of several smaller squares of varying color. It was meant to be used as a puzzle by making each side one color, but it worked great as a way to pass time as well, considering she had her data slate rights revoked. However, as she was switching around the colors on the cube, she heard someone tap near her desk. Looking up from her cube, she was greeted by the six-eyed stare of a serpent. Though she knew Terrace housed members of all 4 races, this was the first time she had seen a serpent. Its tentacled face was a somewhat welcome change of scenery. In both of its hands was a data slate, which it handed to Ryavka once it got her attention. She grabbed it and saw it displayed information for a departure. Well, at least she got used to this stuff. It was pretty much muscle memory at this point. As she was checking the serpent's information through the data slate it provided, it proved much the same as everyone else she checked during her time at the station. This serpent was a historian, working under the Serpent branch of the Union Historical Foundation, leaving to perform an exploration mission alone. Nothing out of the ordinary, apart from the name, which was a collection of glowing lights with serpent next to it for convenience. Then came the departure and destination. Departure: Terrace Research Station. Destination: Soul Dead Zone. Ryavka looked at the serpent standing in front of her desk with a concerned expression. A dead zone meant, well, almost certain death. Their whole purpose was to denote dangerous sections of space meant to be avoided. She knew this from experience, as she lost that cargo freighter in the Sire Dead Zone. Yet, this serpent wanted to go right in the center of one, alone. Since this was a serpent, she knew there was no convincing it to rethink. Besides, it wasn't her job to talk people out of suicide missions. So, she just continued with the procedure as normal. Anything I should know that's not included on here? The security officer had to lean forward a bit to see the bioluminescent response. All of my credentials and information are displayed as required. Any cargo besides what's necessary. Scouting drones, an unprogrammed translator, and one small projectile weapon in case of emergency. Do you want your superiors to be informed of this trip? No, I have already let them know. I will be taking a break from my occupation. Alright, now, should you disappear on your trip to a dead zone, we aren't responsible. Okay. I have made a decision. If I die, then that is only my fault. Well, at least the serpent was making the process easy, she thought. Okay, well, where's your ship located now? I'll give you the card to access it. It is on the 2nd level. The security officer slid their chair to the right and started cycling through the cameras on the security screen, viewing what was on the 2nd docking level. There, on platform 24, protected by a blue force field, was a fairly large Serpent civilian vessel. Well, they assumed it was a civilian vessel. Serpent ships were bizarre in nature and always looked like if you stuck a bunch of scrap metal together and superheated it into a strange kind of art piece. After an affirming nod from the serpent, she went to print an access card. Pushing himself away from the panel and towards the printer on the left, the officer quickly typed in a few commands, and a moment later a small, rectangular piece of plastic began to print layer by layer in the output tray. Once the light of the printer glowed green in confirmation, she picked up the blue access card and checked to make sure it was marked with a code and a one-use warning. The officer shifted back to the front of her desk and held up the newly printed access card to the serpent, who reached out with one of its three-fingered hands to grab it. Safe travels. The serpent slithered away from the security booth, and Ryavka went back to not doing her job and picked up the colorful cube again. With a quick swipe of the card on a raised slot near the platform, the force field protecting their ship dissipated. They slithered up to part of the ship, placing their hand on one part of its geometry. The irregular shapes that made up the exterior began to give way with each part the serpent touched. The machinery clicked, and the outside of the ship began to shift and unfold, creating an opening for the serpent to enter. As they slithered in, the part of the ship that had folded open began to close again and leave a wall in its place. The interior looked exactly as Serpent left it, a near-perfect rectangular room, which was much smaller than what the exterior would have most believe. This room was meant to store cargo for trading or furniture for recreation, but right now it was empty. The only features were the singular escape pod, which also contained an exploration suit and a spiral ramp leading to the top floor. Slithering up the ramp, Serpent went to the above floor of the ship. Only 2 rooms were on the top floor, excluding the empty space near the ramp. To their right was the door to their resting quarters, and in the front was the control room of the ship. Moving forward again and unlocking the door with a simple touch, as they entered, they slid into a bowl-like piece of furniture just in front of the control panel and proceeded to curl up their tail so they could use the controls of the ship comfortably. On the control panel were several screens above, with small blinking lights underneath each one denoting their purpose. The ceiling consisted of more lights, not meant for illumination, but instead to communicate emergencies. Serpent looked towards the screen meant for direct commands to the ship. Using controls similar to what most species would use at either a light show or for digital art, they set the destination to the Soul Dead Zone. And as they were waiting for the ship to process the order, they left the bowl and went to the resting room. Inside, the floor was covered completely by dark blue cushions, meant to be arranged in whatever shape was most comfortable. Serpent piled the cushions into a cone and wrapped themselves around it to form a cozy pyramid. Once the ship lights flashed that it was entering warp speed, Serpent found themselves drifting off into deep meditation. Serpent slowly regained their vision as they escaped from meditation, awoken by a shrill alarm ringing throughout the ship. Though they were still constricted around their pillow stack, they were slightly floating now, due to the lack of gravity. To them, the trip was instantaneous, but it had definitely been longer than that. As they uncurled their body, Serpent immediately went back to the control room of the ship. They still tried to use the bowl to curl into, but the lack of gravity was making it difficult. Unless they held on, they would slightly float. After a few seconds of struggling, they remembered that the bowl could be bent slightly so that Serpent could be secured inside of it. Their tendrils curled inward in embarrassment as they curved the bowl a bit and got back to operating the ship. The first thing they did was check on warp speed status, which they questioned the ship's autopilot on. Displayed in flashes of light mimicking Serpent bioluminescence, the message read, "Destination reached. Local location. Cooper asteroid belt. Duration of travel. 4 rotations." Serpent was definitely in Seoul, so they decided to see what on the screens had been brought up. Seemingly nothing out of the ordinary, and exactly as that cooler described, dead silence. But something else. The Cooper was gone. Nothing was picked up by the passive scanner, and where the Cooper would be was instead empty space. The long-range scanner confirmed this. The Cooper just wasn't there. However, the long-range scanner was picking up interesting anomalies as well. Namely, the debris of a ship not too far from here, located somewhere else in the empty space. Serpent decided to investigate, moving the ship forward and keeping 2 of their eyes focused on the screen, displaying what was in front of the ship. When the debris finally came into view on screen, it was clear what kind of ship it was, even in its weathered state. A veteran ship, mostly intact, but left to ruin for who knows how long. The exterior design alone made it apparent that this ship was centuries old, as this ship design had since been retired by the veteran. Serpent immediately looked from the surveillance screen to the drone screen. Activating one of the scouting drones it had stored, Serpent controlled the drone directly and investigated the destroyed vessel. Outside, nothing pertained as to what caused its demise. No dents, no scratches, nothing. After locating the entrance, they decided to investigate further and open it. However, once the entrance was revealed to be locked, they decided to cut it open instead with the drone's low-power laser drill. Only a small horizontal cut was needed to get the crescent-shaped drone through. The inside was a similar sight. The light on the drone needed to be activated just to see what was inside. The drone was in the airlock right now, the door to the ship proper completely open. Readings of the drone surroundings showed that there was no atmosphere in the ship, probably dissipated after so long. Continuing, the drone floated through the door and went into the hull of the ship. When light shined down the hull, the most disturbing part about the ship was revealed. All throughout the hull was strewn the remains of its crew, frozen and mummified from the vacuum of space. They were mostly intact, but one commonality was amongst all of them, a single wound delivered by unknown weaponry, always to a vital part of the body. Some looked as if they died fighting, others looked like they were running for their lives. And now, their last moments were preserved in the cold empty of space. To prevent themselves from incurring a panic attack, they moved past the scattered bodies and continued on to scouting the ship itself. So far, didn't find anything out of the ordinary, apart from its dilapidated state and, well, more corpses. All the rooms were in disarray, with anything not bolted down, now forever floating. It was a similar sight as seen in the halls, in the dining room, kitchen, storage space, restrooms, everywhere. However, the drone eventually made it to the bridge of the ship, which must have something logged on how it came to end. When the drone made its way to it, it was bolted shut from the inside. Curious, Serpent had the drone activate its laser drill to see what was past the door. After a hole big enough for the drone to float through opened, Serpent looked around the captain's quarters. Right there, not too far away from the door, was the captain, who now lay dead. However, from its position and the bolt pistol in its hand, it looked less like an attack and more like a suicide. Wanting to scavenge any data they could, Serpent moved the drone forwards to the control panel of the bridge and extended a cord from the drone into a slot on the panel. The drone began to transmit its contents back to Serpent, the files being displayed on one of the screens, which he focused all 6 of his eyes on. Only one file remained uncorrupted, so Serpent played its contents on its own screens. A reptilian image of a veteran, the captain when they were still alive, appeared on screen. This is the 4th rotation on the Union scouting vessel Akos Farimker. We've arrived at Earth and yeah, nothing. We haven't gotten any signals and we're just searching around the Cooper at the moment. Our long-range scans so far haven't brought anything up yet, and… Suddenly a veteran burst into the room and yelled something not in veteran standard. Whatever it was, it got the captain to rise from his seat. The recording cut out completely. For the rest of its run, it was nothing but static. It didn't answer many questions, but at least it confirmed that this ship was in fact the scouting mission that was lost. But what destroyed it? A million scenarios ran in Serpent's mind, wondering what was most likely. Was it humans? Pirates? Traitors? Something else? What if that something else came for them? Serpent was only snapped out of their hypothetical imagining when the passive scanners alerted him that something else came up. More debris. Going further into the Cooper Belt, there was in fact more ruins. A cooler ship this time, evident by its more geometric appearance. It was a similar sight to the veteran ship, just cooler corpses instead, and no captain's suicide. In fact, it looked as if the captain had gone down fighting this time, having been blasted by some unknown weaponry while they carried a heavy rifle. This only added more questions than answers. Were these 2 separate scouting missions, or the same group? Why was the debris so pristine? Even in the dark empty of space, abandoned ships were bound to collide with something. Was this… Wait. Was this a trap? Suddenly, the lights turned across the ceiling of the control room, began to flash rapidly, communicating danger and an unknown vessel approaching. The serpent immediately looked to see what the danger was, and looking at the viewing screen closer, revealed an unknown object in the distance. Its shape was indeterminable, due to it apparently being pitch black, but it was decorated with strange red patterns as well, their glow showing the object to be roughly cube-shaped. Not Union, but also definitely not human, at least according to the few records on the subject of human spacecraft that serpent could find. It was hard to tell just how large the object was due to the distance, but by rough estimation, it was no larger than the serpent's ship. The lights were flashing a different message now. The comm system had been hacked, a message was being received in the same direction as that cube. The comm screen began to flash colors, transmitting a message, apparently coming from the unknown ship. The pace of the flashes was slow, wanting to drill whatever it had to say into Serpent's mind. The message was simple, apparently not meant to be a threat, but certainly received as one. To be continued. Author's name and the link to original text is in the description. Consider tapping the thumbs up and pressing the subscribe button if you enjoyed this video.